working against myself here because you've seen me trying to keep the trains moving on time, and now I'm standing in the way of the trains moving on time, but I'll do my best. We've asked them to clear your plates while we transition from lunch to the afternoon program, which is going to be incredible, I think. I told Del and John Pratt and some of the others that if you fed my 20-page CV into Chat GPT and said, what's the best job for this guy? It would have spit out this job at the National Council. It's the dream job. It brings together all the different things that I work on, that I enjoy, including all of the panels this morning. You know, for me, it's all connected and it's all central to what I've been doing over the last 39 years working in and on the region. Normally, I give a half-hour lecture at this conference on geopolitics. We don't have time for that, but we'll be doing a webinar in December on my latest trip to North Africa and on more of a country-by-country look at the region. So stay tuned for that. If you want to have a preview, I wrote 1 year into the Trump administration, 2017, an article entitled "The Trump Administration and the Perils of Ignoring North Africa," in which I looked at a range of issues in North Africa that the Trump administration was mostly ignoring or sort of improving through benign neglect as White House staffers sort of pushed things through that maybe the senior leadership wasn't looking at. And I kind of looked at that dynamic. So you can take a look at my article in the Arab Center volume on the Trump administration at 1 year. I also was proud to be on the Trump administration trip to Saudi Arabia in 2017. I was one of the 30 experts that flew to Saudi Arabia, and I got a first-hand look at the disconnect that was mentioned in some of the speeches before me between aspirations and implementation. But it was a real learning experience to me to sort of be up front and center in the first Trump administration trip overseas. I was recently at UNGA, which was mentioned, and I was on a panel out in front of the United Nations on a Turkish state television, TRT, and we had an hour-long discussion on whether the UN should just go away. You know, and I've been hearing a lot of lamenting today about the breakdown in international institutions and how terrible the violations of international law are, and I agree on all that. But after an hour of moaning about it on, what is that, First Avenue in New York, we realized, you know, we kind of have to work with the UN we have rather than reinvent it. I don't think the problem is the UN. I know as a longtime diplomat, it's the product of the successes or failures of the cooperation of the states. It's not the UN. It's what states are doing at the UN with wonderful tools that have been developed since the 1940s. That's my defense of the UN. The famous 14th century traveler Ibn Battuta, born in Tangiers, and we have someone from Tangiers here today, said, and I thought this was appropriate for this room, traveling, it gives you home in 1,000 strange places and leaves you a stranger in your own land. And I think many in the room have had that experience of sort of going overseas, being changed by it, and then coming home and not feeling like things are right, like you fit in, you know, and then you're thinking about the homes elsewhere. I think a lot of people in this room have had that experience of coming and going and not fitting, and it's wonderful that organizations like this, in many sense, become a home. You know, that the networks we built become a home. You know, that we can come and go. We have the luxury to do that and enrichen our lives, not because of where we are, but because of who we're with. I had the privilege at the State Department of starting the Science Envoy program, which was mentioned, and picking Elias Zerhouni, one of the most accomplished Arab Americans, to be the first Science Envoy for the United States, who was the former head of NIH, and I got to travel to 8 countries with him, including Saudi Arabia in late 2010s. And one of the interesting things we learned during this trip is that we sort of knew what the global challenges are, and they're no longer North African challenges or Middle Eastern challenges. They're global challenges, all of them. And we learned that there was a common need to tackle the issue of food insecurity, a common need to tackle the issue of water insecurity, and the common need to tackle the issue of energy security, and they're all interlinked. They're deeply interlinked. In fact, there's a term engineers use now, which is watergy, and you mix into food insecurity and security issues. It's sort of all one big global set of issues we're dealing with that we'll have to work on together. We also knew that we'd be working on educational issues and health issues and environmental issues, and we heard a lot about that in our Science Envoy visits. What we didn't expect to hear, and what was the big surprise we reported back to the White House, was that countries were also deeply investing in science and technology and wanted help from the United States on figuring out where to invest. And I was reminded of that watching the video on Egypt, because massive investments are going on in a part of the world that wants American guidance, and not even in many times American dollars. They just want help sort of picking where to go. And the other one was in job creation. I first learned this issue as a graduate student when I was looking at how we were massively investing, as was NIH, and this was Zerhouni's position when we started. We're massively investing in women and children and 0 through 5 and vaccine programs and survival. And we were creating a tripling of population growth in countries because of our goodwill. And so all of these countries with youth bulge, it wasn't because of some, too many children being born. In fact, that was going down. The problem was that the mortality rates were plummeting 3 times faster than the birth rates were plummeting. And we, through our largesse and our science and our medicine, created the youth bulge, which is plaguing all the countries now. And I went to the head of UNICEF, who was speaking at my school, and said, what are we doing about these tens of millions of extra youth who are surviving because of our largesse? And she said, we had a meeting about it. We don't really know. And here we are, a couple of decades after that conversation, talking about all these excess youth. What do we do with them? And we still haven't figured it out. And it's a huge problem across the MENA region, what to do with all these extra young people that we all participated through our largesse and our philanthropy in helping survive. The North Africa region has massive amount of natural wealth, a lot of mineral wealth, new discoveries in mineral wealth, rare earth and other things. But its real potential is the hundreds of millions of people. It's the human capital. It's the highly educated people of North Africa with not enough to do, not much to do. 120 new universities. Who's plugging in with them? Not money. I've been to probably 20 of them, and they're like, where are the Americans? We'd like to cooperate with you. Well, they're not there. So huge opportunities for engagement. Ibn Khaldun, another scholar from the Middle Ages, gave what historians often call the best definition of government. Ibn Khaldun said, a government is an organization that prevents injustice other than it commits itself. Say it twice more. And this is something I'm thinking about listening to this conference and watching the political transition. And I also have to say that the North Africa program has been graciously funded by the Mary and William Grieve Foundation, and we've had the pleasure to begin working with John Kaiser. 60 whose books were distributed last night. We have more copies if you're interested. But his book on Abdul Qadir is a study in leadership too, and I wanted to just read a little bit of the Moroccan intellectual Mohamed Shtatout's recent review of John Kaiser's book on the father of the Algerian nation, Abdul Qadir. He said, Abdul Qadir's life shows the potential for cross-cultural influence and global respect. This is this 19th century Algerian figure who fought the French and saved Christians in Damascus from a pogrom. He earned the admiration of Abraham Lincoln, Napoleon III, and Pope Pius IX because of his moral conduct and humanitarian principles, which, by the way, led to the Geneva Conventions. It was based on the clemency Abdul Qadir showed in certain respects. This aspect of his life teaches that values of justice, respect, and ethical behavior are universal, transcending cultural and religious boundaries, and leaders who uphold these values can achieve global influence and respect no matter their background. Throughout the resistance, Abdul Qadir also engaged in diplomacy with the French, demonstrating that effective leadership often involves a balance between war and negotiation. He knew when to fight and when to negotiate, showing the importance of adaptability and the power of dialogue. This book highlights that negotiation, dialogue, and peacemaking are essential tools in a leader's repertoire. Abdul Qadir's willingness to compromise when necessary without sacrificing his principles demonstrates the value of diplomacy. Despite his global recognition and respect, Abdelkader remained humble and focused on serving others, both in his leadership in Algeria and later in exile in France and then Syria. He understood that leadership was a form of service and not a quest for power. This teaches the importance of humility in leadership. Leaders who act with humility and serve the common good are more likely to leave lasting legacies of respect and admiration. For Kaiser, wrote Statu, Abdelkader was not only a saint warrior, but a man who believed in the supremacy of knowledge. Quoting Kaiser, Abdelkader believed that pursuing knowledge was the highest good and life's ultimate purpose because it leads people to right conduct. His world was one of hierarchy, affecting both social relations and knowledge, which was hierarchical. In his 1856 letter to the French, written at the request of the Asian Society of Paris, the emir laid out his understanding of what made humanity different from the rest of creation. Man's love of knowledge and pursuit of truths that transcend the senses, the truths of mathematics, geometry, philosophy, and moral truths. He said, yet the most important form of knowledge, he believed, was that what he called political. Why? Because relationships matter. We are social animals and therefore need to cooperate with others in order to survive. For the emir, no knowledge was more important than that needed for living harmoniously in the polis and guiding human behavior justly. And to conclude, echoing what Fukara, my friend, said last night, quoting Lao Tzu, I believe, Lao Tzu, the Chinese philosopher, said, "He who controls others may be powerful, but he who has mastered himself is mightier still." Thank you very much.